Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest Blood Red podcast with me, Ian Doyle. As anybody who's watching on video will see, we are once again not in the studio. However, I am joined from his homestead by Sir Paul of Gorst. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Ian.
How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, we are now somehow less than a week away before the new Premier League season, and I don't know about you, but I'm not ready for it yet. I'm not ready to go trekking up and down the country once again.
No,
Quite enjoying time off from all of that. But it feels like it's coming around really fast. I don't know if that's because the World Cup was there and across what's normally the wasteland of June. I don't know, but it feels like the football has never really stopped, has it? There's been no break.
Football never stops. Football never stops,
Yeah.
of course, as is famously known. It never stops, and it continued on Sunday with Liverpool finishing the pre-season programme. There was a goalless draw earlier in the day, a 70-minute game, which we weren't told it was going to be 70 minutes until it started, against Como. 0-0, let's not talk about that. However, let us do talk about the game that we were at, which was basically the senior team against the Como senior team. Como, of course, in the Champions League this season, managed by Cesc Fabregas. I think they finished 4th or 5th in Serie A. So, decent team. Liverpool ended up winning fairly comfortably in the end, 2-0.
Yeah, relatively straightforward. I think what was probably most encouraging is Liverpool didn't really collapse in the second half, and I suppose that was always likely to an extent, given the Monaco results and the Leeds results were basically brought on by a raft of changes and players who, you wouldn't normally be seeing, even in the sort of League Cup squad. So, no real surprise that when Iraola picks his main men and they play for 70, 80, 90 minutes, that Liverpool put in a more complete performance. It wasn't brilliant the second half, was it, by any stretch? I can't even think of any chances, really. Gravenberch, I think, hits the bar late on, but Liverpool looking good in the first half of games, which bodes well. It's, you can sort of see in these first halves what they're working towards in terms of going forward with some of the patterns of play and stuff like that. And it was a good game for Jérémy Frimpong, who I think needed it, because I think the jury is still very much out on him as to where he plays and if he's got the ability to be a Liverpool player long term. So he had a good half. And of course, Jérémy Jacquet and Araujo playing a half each are the sort of standout talking points, aren't they? A bit of a new look centre-back department for Liverpool this season, and both showed enough of what they're about, I think. So, yeah, loads of positives to take. Not too many negatives, really. Can't really think of too many other than the fact that they didn't really put the foot down on Como in the second half and make it 3 or 4. But, yeah, a really good way to end what has been a decent pre-season without being a spectacular one.
Yeah, we'll go on to those centre-backs then. Let's talk about Jacquet first. Unusual situation whereby 50 minutes in, he's already getting his name chanted by the cop. I mean, I know a little bit about that is, oh, look, they've actually got a centre-back, hooray. And also, quite a lot of the people who go to these friendlies don't normally go to the games. I can't really imagine that would have happened in a league game or something like that. But he did what he had to do. And also for a lot of fans and journalists, we haven't really seen him play before, have we, really? So it was quite an eye-opener just to see basically how tall he was. He's reasonably fast, and he's not afraid to kind of get stuck in, is he?
No, absolutely not. It was first couple of minutes, wasn't it, when he gets pressed and it's a bit of an awkward ball. It's sort of like waist height for him, and he turns on it quite neatly and gets Liverpool out of trouble and builds it from the back, and fans really responded to that. And, everything he did was really good, wasn't it? He's not shy of putting a tackle in, as you say. There was one or two occasions where he sort of follows his man into midfield, which isn't really the done thing at Liverpool. So little things like that will get ironed out as the season goes. He was tracking his man, and then we were looking along the line, weren't we, in that first half? And there was the back three of Van Dijk, Kerkez, and Frimpong, and Jacquet was somewhere up in the field trying to harry his man out of possession. So little things to work on like that, but I thought he did really well. He looks confident on the ball. He's not shy of going in with sort of shoulder to shoulder and backing himself to win those types of duels. He obviously gets his goal, and all round it was just a really good performance from him. Obviously only 45 minutes, but I put a tweet out last night, and obviously a lot of it is tongue-in-cheek to an extent. It is only pre-season. You have only seen 45 minutes of him, but the general consensus was that he was brilliant, and he did have a really good half. But that being said, Liverpool knew they were signing him in January, but still wanted to keep Konate. He's only played 45 minutes since February. It was only a friendly. He hasn't played a single minute in the Premier League yet. So, he's got leaps and bounds to come on yet. But I think what you can say, it was a very encouraging, first outing for him. And you can see almost immediately why Liverpool feel that he could be a really big player for them in the coming years.
Now, because of all that, I mean, obviously he got his goal as well, which people have been not slow to point out that he's managed in 40-odd minutes what Joe Gomez has never managed, which is to score a goal. But, centre-backs aren't really the first and foremost to be goal threats. Although you would have thought Gomez might have scored one by now, given the amount of games he's played. But because of the things you just mentioned, do you feel as though Araujo, who came on at half-time for him, didn't really look out of place, but then he's a player who's played 8 years at Barcelona, he's played in massive games, he's won titles. It shouldn't really be an issue for him to come in and do that. And he looks quite a physical specimen as well, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's 6 or 7 years difference, isn't there, between Araujo and Jérémy Jacquet, obviously Uruguay international, captain of Barcelona. And there was very much no frills. If there were one or two frills with Jérémy Jacquet, not least getting on the score sheet, there was certainly none with Araujo. And there was a tackle made near our side, when he just absolutely thundered into it and just took no prisoners. And there was one in the second half where he actually tackles one of the Como players and takes Gravenberch out with him. And it's that sort of, take everything and ask questions later. And I think Liverpool fans will really respond to that sort of defender, actually. And okay, he's got a little bit of quality on the ball as well, which you'd expect. But I think first and foremost, he is a sort of nuts and bolts centre-back, isn't he? Which, for all the, the sort of eye-catching nature of Jacquet's performance, I think Liverpool could probably use something a bit more straight down the middle for that game against Newcastle. With the experience of Araujo and this idea that he's not going to overcomplicate things, he's going to get it. He's going to play it out to the fullback. He might play it in field now and again, but thou shalt not pass is sort of his way of defending, isn't it? So, again, early days, of course, but you can see why Liverpool think that he could be a really shrewd option as well. Not costing the earth. Could be a really good, useful option for them. And just need to get Leone on the men now, get him some minutes, and Gomez back in the fold. And, what had looked a bit of a crisis a week ago now looks like a little bit of a area of real strength, doesn't it? So, good outings for both of them, and Van Dijk alongside both. He basically challenged both of them after the game to put it into practice when it really matters. So, I thought both were really good in their own sort of different ways on the night.
And the thing about Araujo as well is that he'll kind of take the pressure off Van Dijk in a way, in the sense that when Jacquet or Leone line up alongside Van Dijk, he's going to have to, certainly for the first couple of weeks, probably first couple of months, is just kind of guide them through the game, which is what he had to do with Konate to a certain extent for quite some time. He didn't have to do it with Matip, and he didn't have to do it with Gomez. He's had to do it with Kirkes to a degree on his side of the flank. We saw the first 3-4 months of last season, the amount of times that he was pointing at him and shouting at him. You'd see a lot less of that now because they're much more used to it. But with Araujo, as I said before, he's got that experience. He'll know what he needs to do, and he'll kind of, in terms of the win, so he's probably won even more than Van Dijk's won.
Yeah, I mean, he's 27, isn't he? I think we spoke loads on this pod about what sort of profile Liverpool should be looking at when it came to this idea that they needed a centre-back. And I think everyone was in agreement that they did need one because, you only have to look at Ndukwi and Njai lining up in pre-season in some of the friendlies, knowing that Ndukwi have to go on loan anyway, and Salah and Njai, was very much one for the future, isn't he? One for the academy ranks this season, or maybe he might even go on loan, I'm not sure. But, so getting someone in who wasn't going to break the bank, because there are other areas that need furnishing a bit more, and someone who's going to be experienced enough, but also not past it. And I think in terms of what Liverpool are looking for, he ticks loads of boxes, doesn't he, Araujo? He's a international, 27, played a really big club like Barcelona, as big as Liverpool, captain of them. And I think Liverpool have been really impressed with his leadership qualities as well, because that's another thing that's been thrown at them, hasn't it? They haven't got too many of those, certainly since Salah and Robertson walked out the door. So, yeah, in so many ways, he ticks a lot of boxes. And I said last week on the show that I'm still a little bit, still one or two caveats with the decision to bring him in. But yesterday was a good start, and now let's see him do it in the Premier League. Let's see him, basically just put in 6, 7 out of 10. So that's all Liverpool need at the moment, isn't it? Just someone who's going to be a dependable centre-back, who's not going to make any howling bricks or anything like that, and just someone to steady the ship and allow the midfield and the forward players to get on the ball and go and create and go and do the damage.
And if he can show that leadership, it may even be a case of, and it's going to come at some point, that Van Dijk's rested for some games, and you could have Araujo lined up alongside, whether it's Jacquet, Gomez or Leone, which you don't really want. We mentioned this at the game between ourselves. You don't really want a situation where it's Leone and Jacquet, because they're both, 19 and 21, young. I mean, in terms of the future, possibly that would be a great partnership, and that's one that Liverpool are looking at long term, but not anytime soon. So we can ease the pressure on Van Dijk in that sense as well. And I think this is possibly something that people have kind of overlooked. He's not just filling the gap, as you mentioned, having that leadership qualities, but it can also ease the burden in terms of experience and that leadership on Van Dijk.
Yeah, I think, it's certainly an FSG mandate to think that Liverpool look for players with years on the someone who is going to come in at a certain age and their best years are to come. And it's the same with Leone, it's the same with Jacquet. These young defenders who they've been looking at for, they've been searching for clutchy young centre-backs for years, haven't they? And it feels like they've got them now with, obviously, those two around the first-team ranks. They've signed the two teenagers in Ndukwi and Jai. And that has been a very concerted effort over a period of time. You go back to 3-4 years when you're looking at Levi Colwill and Lenny Yoro and Dean Huijsen, these sorts of profiles of players. So it feels like Liverpool have finally got their men in who they've got at the moment, Leone and Jacquet in particular. But there's a lot to be said for players who are going to come in and perform now. It's not always thinking 5 years down the line, is it? You can let the grass grow at times if you're thinking ahead to the future too much. And, that is why someone like Isak was brought in last summer, for example. It isn't always about thinking for the future. Sometimes you can win now, and of course, it didn't quite work out last season. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to occasionally buy someone who's ready-made alongside the lads who are going to be at their peak in 3 or 4 years. So, someone like Ekitike is a bit of a happy medium there, isn't he? Florian Wirtz, even Kerkez, they're all young, but have shown enough that they're going to be really important players for Liverpool. But, there's no harm in buying players who are 26, 27 now, with a view to them performing straight away and being big players almost immediately. So, okay, you don't want to be spending the lion's share of the budget on those types of profiles, but occasionally they can add experience and they can add quality to what is a young group, sort of Van Dijk and Alisson aside now. So, yeah, let's see how Araujo gets on. Still got, your little question marks here or there. I was going to adapt to, the competitive stuff, but going off what he showed yesterday, he's certainly aggressive and combative, and that's what Liverpool need, really, because too often they got outfought last season, which was a sin, really.
Would you expect him to start against Newcastle, Araujo? I know you kind of hinted at it just then. I mean, I know Jacquet started the game, and long term, they didn't pay 60 million to keep a player on the bench. But for this game, it's going to be an emotional occasion, which we've mentioned in the past. Yeah. So it is one where there's going to be, you need those kind of cool heads, that kind of experience, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can understand anyone who thinks that Jacquet's showing yesterday means that he deserves to be starting, but I just think there's a lot to be said for keeping it simple. Winning your headers, winning your blocks, defending Dan Burn on corners. Handling the occasion, handling the atmosphere. They're going to be right up for it. The fans, Newcastle, understandably. Liverpool not their favourite club, are they? Victor Munoz was just the tip of the iceberg, really, and Isak's going to be going back there, and he's going to be in for a hell of a reception there. Brand new era for them, new manager, new look team to an extent, although they've certainly got work to do. So, yeah, I probably will go with Araujo over Munoz, over Jacquet on this one, just for the experience factor. He will have played in, Classicos and stuff like that, and knows how to handle these sorts of big games. So, yeah, I probably would go with Araujo over Jacquet, even though Jacquet was probably a bit more eye-catching in the nature of his performance yesterday.
New kit as well for Newcastle, which we looked at yesterday, and it's absolutely terrible, isn't it? I mean, it's black and white stripes. How can you possibly get that wrong? How can you get it wrong? It's,
Funnily enough, they got beat by Leverkusen on Saturday, didn't they, at St. James's Park, and the new coach, is it Matthias Jassel, is it? I think that's his name. He actually asked them to change the kit midway through because he felt it was too much of a kit clash. And, that, the optics of that from afar probably suggests that all isn't quite right there at the moment. And it's, he said that himself, and the team looks like it's in a bit of a mess. They've sold all their best players, haven't particularly recruited everyone who they want in at the moment. And I think it's a good time for Liverpool to be going there, actually. Their supporters are going to be right up for it, like they were last August when we went there on... It was a bank holiday Monday, but, maybe the players are not quite ready for this new season. I think Liverpool can try and take full advantage of that on the day and come away with what would be a really big 3 points to start the Areola era.
Well, before we crack on with a bit more, we have to have a word from our sponsors, who, of course, are NordVPN. And their app can help you with things like protection for your private data, like bank details, passwords, and online identity. NordVPN can also switch your virtual location, meaning you can save money by purchasing flights, hotel subscriptions from other countries at a cheaper price. And if for more benefits and more information, download the NordVPN app to your device. Don't download it to mine and Paul's because we've already got it. And click the link in the podcast episode description box below. And if you want to get the best discounts off your NordVPN plan, go to the link, and the link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Are we on board with Nord, Paul?
We are on board with Nord. I think we need to bring back the Nord.
I've got to say, should we do it now then?
We'll do it next week because we'll have a Premier League game to talk about, won't we? And
yeah, okay. Well, that'll be making a comeback. Now, something else that needs to make a comeback for Liverpool is a right winger, because they've not really... Well, we know quite well that they're obviously trying to sign one, or at least one.
Are they? Do we know this?
Yeah. Apparently, it's there's been some news about that over the last 3 months. Because the one who was there left. What was his name? Mohamed Salah or something like that, was it? I can't remember. Yeah, it's that long ago. But Iraola's kind of been rotated through all his options, hasn't he, so far in the summer, and we ended up with. Ngamo started against Como. Then Luis Kumas came on, who'd started against Monaco, and he went there. And then Victor Munoz came on, and he ended it there. And you'd have to say, on the evidence of probably the last 2 games, with the exception maybe of Kumas in the first half against Monaco, no one's really kind of grabbed hold of that, have they?
No, I don't like it. Don't like it at all, really. We've spoke loads about the idea of Ngamo playing there on the right. It was something we spoke about before the pre-season. That they were the sort of noises, having 1 or 2 conversations with people, that was going to be a thing. And then you see it in practice, and I'm just not sure. I mean, it's obviously early days. He's only played there against Wrexham in New York, and to be fair, he scores the winning goal in that one. And he's probably the best of the bunch there, Rio Ngamo. But he's just so much more effective off the left, isn't he? So much more naturally at home. That's where he feels he's at his best, and he can be the player that Liverpool feel he can become. So it's just a little bit of a square peg in a round hole there, really, whoever you're putting in. Munoz tried, didn't he? And Kumas, Chiesa playing in that behind closed doors game probably tells you a lot, doesn't it, in terms of where he's viewed in the pecking order at the moment.
There's Harvey Elliott as well. He played on the right in the behind closed doors game.
Yeah, and he plays a little bit differently, doesn't he? Because he's left-footed. He looks to come in field and doesn't necessarily have the pace of the rest of that group that we've just mentioned. So I just don't like it. It's just a bit of a glaring area of the pitch that needs addressing. And less than a week until the Premier League season starts, doesn't feel like we're any nearer along to sorting a Mohamed Salah replacement out. And look, I know the replacements was Isaac in terms of who's going to be the top goal scorer, who's going to have the burden on their shoulders to do that. And I know that you're not going to get a second Mo Salah because they don't grow on trees. Third highest goal scorer in the club's history, but he told the club he was leaving whenever that was communicated privately, but it became official in March, into the March international break. So you're getting on for 5 months now that Liverpool have had to prepare for his departure. And it's been 3 months since they've known that they're going to be in the Champions League. And we're still seemingly no further along towards finding that right winger to come in. And we know that they wanted Diamande. We know that they do want Barcola, however we're saying it. But the season begins on Sunday. And who's going to start on that right wing on Sunday? I don't know. You're buying players with a longer view and maybe waiting for one or two things to happen the other end, the PSG. But it just feels like they've had months to prepare for this, and they've just, like I said earlier on, allowed the grass to grow. And here we are now, week of the season, and Iraola is still looking at his options, thinking who's going to be the best of an awkward bunch in terms of playing on that right wing on Sunday afternoon. And I know that Barcola probably prefers playing on the left anyway, and if you're bringing him in for that kind of fee, then you want him playing where he's most comfortable. But I don't know. Ibrahim Mbaye, he's a right winger, isn't he? Would he be better suited than what Liverpool have already got on their books? Probably, if that's his natural position. I've only really seen him at the World Cup for Senegal, so I can't really make that judgment myself. But it just feels like that area of the pitch has needed addressing for months, and still no real idea as to how it's going to look. And once the season begins and the window shuts.
I mean, to me, it just seems as though they thought they were going to get Diamande, and they'd be given, obviously, encouraging noise that it could get done, and then it didn't. And it didn't in a way that he said he would. Well, we were told it emerged that he wanted to go to PSG, and he ends up going to Real Madrid and says it's his dream move, and it's like, hang on, like, what did he actually want? So whether Liverpool have been played there, and you could argue that the centre-back situation we just explained about, that Kanate possibly a little bit played Liverpool, because for him to not saying in April he was going to sign a contract and then not sign one and then end up going to Real Madrid, it's like, hang on, something's happened there. Must have happened. So that's kind of put Liverpool on the back foot. They've sorted the centre-back thing, as we mentioned, a temporary fix that could become permanent, although I'm pretty sure they won't end up paying that money for Araujo unless he's absolutely amazing. But with this right wing, there was the 4 players, wasn't there? They were linked with. There was the Minty at Brighton. There was the lad at Lille and the lad at Cologne, and Diamande and Barcola. And I think only one of them's moved so far. The other 3 are still there, but it looks like at least one of them could be moving somewhere else. And suddenly your options are becoming more and more limited, because the other teams are going to start, panicking. Not panicking, but with the deadline, what is it? Less than 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks tomorrow, isn't it? Away. That, as you say, Liverpool have known for 5 months that this was coming down the road, and they don't seem to have been willing to deal with it in a way that's helped the manager. I think that's the one thing. You got a new manager who you've made the decision to get rid of the other one and appoint a new one. Now, at that point, having known for 2 months that he's going to need a right winger, and another 3 months down the line, and it's still not happened. For him, he's going to be frustrated. I don't know. We obviously don't know what promises or what he's been told and how involved he is in this, because if they are bringing Barcola in, they're not going to spend that amount of money, as you mentioned, and not playing where perhaps he prefers. But maybe part of the plan is to play him on the right, because if he's playing on the left, you've already got Munoz you paid for. You've already got Rio and Gamoa you don't want to block the pathway to. Then that brings on to Cody Gakpo, He's probably been, over the two friendlies, have just played Liverpool's best player. And I don't think Liverpool are in a situation where they can afford to lose players, certainly in attack when Chiesa, we've mentioned, he's probably not going to get much of a look in. Elliott's miles off in terms of his fitness. Ekitike is going to be out probably until next year. Then you're suddenly reliant on a lot of left wingers and Isak. And Isak's shown that he can pick up an injury. And the thing about Gakpo, he wasn't particularly great at it towards the end of last season, but he can play up front if needs be. So it would strike me as being a bit odd if Gakpo goes to try and fund Barcola in a position where if he ends up on the left, Liverpool actually didn't need a player.
Yeah, I've got no interest in listening in hearing about Liverpool being willing to sell player A, B, or C because the squad's not brilliant. At a certain point, you have to put your foot down on players leaving. Curtis Jones probably the perfect example of that. Inter, we believe that they're only $5 million apart now in their valuations. So does that get done? The fact that they've been so insistent on trying to bring him in, I think they've bid 3 times now. Having tried to get him in January, suggests that Curtis is very open to the idea of going to Milan and going to Inter, joining Inter. So if he moves on, they need another midfielder because, I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear this talk of, any Trey Agnoni can take his place because Trey Agnoni was able to take his place last season and didn't. We know he's come on leaps and bounds in this pre-season, but a player who's already there, you can't start pretending that he's a replacement for me because we know that you're going to have to use the full remit of this squad across the course of a long season where you're competing on 4 fronts. And we've just seen to an extent what happens when you don't use that full remit. You get injuries, and then you're forced to rely on players who you don't particularly trust. So, I don't want to hear any of this Gakpo leaving stuff because who's coming in the other end at the moment? There's no one, is there?
Listen, Gakpo at push can do a job on the right as well. I mean, that's not his best position of the front three at all, but he's did it when Salah went on. I think it was African Cup of Nations duties a couple of times. I think there was between him and Luis Diaz, and they should sign someone like Luis Diaz. He's quite good. And also, you mentioned about optics is that they've just look as though they're about to. Well, they've agreed this investment deal as we've mentioned, and it looks a bit poor that you're then fiddling around because Liverpool would say, because we both mentioned this the weekend, that they've only brought in £700,000 in terms of sales. I mean, I think Curtis is gone. I think he'll go.
Yeah.
I think if they can get money for either Elliott or Chiesa, I think one of them will go. And I can kind of see their point of view that, well, we don't necessarily need to replace either of those two because we've got these numbers, but then you're reliant on everybody staying fit. And you're reliant on I mentioned this in the podcast so many times last season that there's always assumptions that you got to make. And for years, Liverpool were just making the right assumptions. But last year, nearly everything they assumed ended up not happening. And they need to be careful they don't go down that road again and start making those mistakes. You can't cover for everything. You can't cover for every eventuality. But if you've already got, as we mentioned, no right winger, and you've already got a midfield that maybe one or two of the players, you look at McAllister, what's he going to be like this season? You look at, you mentioned Agnoni, you don't know how good he's going to be. You got question marks over a couple of them. You can't just then let a player who played more than 40 games go and not replace him either, especially when Wataru Endo barely played last season as well. I mean, he's 32 now, is he, or 33? I think he's, so if you get somebody like him 10 years younger, then that'd be an excellent buy. Somebody who's defensive minded in midfield can also play a couple of defensive roles as well. So him 10 years younger, but then how much would that cost?
Yeah. But then, I mean, you've got Endo and Elliott who haven't played for 2 years, really, haven't you? Let's face it.
And Chiesa as well, really.
Yeah. But, I mean, in Elliott's case, Iraola is clearly going to play this 4-2-3-1 formation, isn't he, with Florian Wirtz as the number 10. But he's not going to play every game. So could Elliott not be that player when Liverpool play in the League Cup or Liverpool play, FA Cup in January? These sorts of lower profile games where you're looking to make one or two changes. Is there not a role there for Harvey Elliott to stay on board and play that role? Because He'd be quite suited to it.
Yeah, the thing is, he doesn't even have to prove himself as a Liverpool player because he's already done it. He did it under Klopp, so that's not the question. But the problem for him is that, as you mentioned, he's not played for 2 years, and he looked like a player who hasn't played for 2 years, and that's a bit of a concern. The thing is, that might end up being to Liverpool's advantage because, with the greatest respect to him, who's going to want to buy a player who's not played for 2 years? And especially if you're looking for somebody for the here and now, probably the best thing for him might be to stay.
Yeah.
Certainly for the first half of the season, but then after that, he's out of contract at the end of the year. So would he be spending the 4 months playing for a contract, or would he be spending the 4 months trying to get the fitness, which will then get him a good move at the end of the year?
Well, the contract one's interesting because it got put to him in the mix zone in New York, and he sort of said he didn't know how long he had left on his contract. We wasn't sure whether Liverpool had an option to extend it or not. So, if he's not sure, I'd probably be minded to say that that's a bit of a grey area because
that will change things massively if he does have another year on top of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it means Liverpool are under less pressure to get rid of him essentially, and there might not be much of a market for him like there was 12 months ago. So, yeah, I mean that's a really interesting one. But I go back to the Jones one. If Liverpool are content to let him go, they need another midfielder because, with as big a prospect as Traore is, Jones has played over 200 games for Liverpool. You can't just say the 19-year-old who's played 8 or 9 times can come in and be the sort of impactful player that Jones can. You'd have absolute faith in Jones starting any game, wouldn't you? In that midfield, you'd trust him in any fixture, any magnitude.
And played it right back towards the end of last season. So,
yeah. But it's a different kettle of fish, isn't it? When Traore only starts, and obviously he's a young player with a big future. But I'd just be a little bit uneasy about sort of trying to pretend that Traore was in any way a replacement because he's already been here and he's already at the club. So, yeah, let's see what happens with Jones. Elliott's another interesting one. For me, the Chiesa ship has sailed. He was very much stating that he loves the club in Nashville and that he wants to fight for his place. But, is the writing on the wall for him when he's part of the reserves in a behind closed doors game? Not even on the bench. Yesterday, was he, for the 6 o'clock kickoff? Maybe is his stock still relatively high in Italy? Can Liverpool get what they paid for him 2 years ago? I don't know, but all the talk is of players leaving. When are they going to start to address that balance? Because I think they've solved the issue at centre back now with Araujo coming in. They basically just needed someone, like we said, bit of experience, dependable, not going to break the bank, and they've done that with him. But this isn't just wanting transfers for wanting transfers' sake. This is give this new manager who you've got complete faith in, the tools that he needs to go and make sure that last year was a bit of a one-off blip. You've got to move forward, you've got to move past it, and you've got to improve.
Right, I think that should do us. Join us later this week for our next Blood Red podcast. I think me and Paul will be back on Friday for looking ahead to the game against Newcastle. Cheerio.